AITA for leaving my husband at the hospital after he refused to be in the delivery room with me. Hello Reddit eyes plus here. This happened 2 months ago, but it's still causing ripples in my family and I need to know if I made the right choice. My husband, Jake, 32 million, and I, 29 female, have been together for 6 years, married for 3. We were both overjoyed when we found out I was pregnant with our first child, and despite the tough pregnancy, morning sickness, gestational diabetes, and all, Jake was there, my rock. He was so sweet and attentive that I felt like we could handle anything together. As my due date approached, we discussed the birth plan, and I told Jake how important it was for me to have him there in the delivery room. He'd always agreed. But a few weeks before, I noticed Jake was acting strange. He was quiet, constantly checking his phone, and avoiding any talk about the baby. I figured he was just anxious about becoming a dad, so I didn't push it too much. The day of labor finally came. Jake drove me to the hospital, but he was distant, more than ever. When we arrived, he pulled the nurse aside for a private chat, and moments later, she told me that Jake wouldn't be in the delivery room. He told her he was uncomfortable with blood and medical procedures. I was stunned. This was never mentioned before. I felt abandoned. I begged him to stay, but he kept saying, "I can't do this." My heart shattered, but I had no choice but to push through. Labor was brutal. Hours of pain, fear, and exhaustion. I felt every contraction with the weight of loneliness, aching for my husband's presence. When our son was born, the joy I expected was muted by Jake's absence. I held our baby, feeling a mix of love and deep sadness. After I was transferred to a recovery room, I asked the nurse to bring Jake. She came back and told me he had left hours ago. He wasn't answering my calls, and when I finally got through to him, I told him I was done, and he could find his own way home. I was angry and heartbroken. The next day, Jake showed up with flowers and apologies, explaining he'd panicked and gone home, where he'd accidentally fallen asleep. His excuses felt hollow, and I couldn't bring myself to forgive him. I asked him to leave. Since then, Jake has been trying desperately to make it right. He started going to therapy and parenting classes. He's stepped up, being an amazing father and more supportive than ever. But every time I look at him, I can't help but remember the pain of that lonely night. My family is torn. Some say I'm being too harsh, that Jake made a mistake and is trying to fix it. Others think I'll never be able to trust him again, and that our marriage can't survive this. But here's where the story takes a turn. One night, after we put our son to bed, Jake sat down and told me everything. He opened up about his overwhelming fear of becoming a father. He admitted that it wasn't the blood or the hospital that had scared him, it was the crushing weight of responsibility, the fear of failing both me and our child. He told me he felt completely unprepared and ashamed that he couldn't be the man I needed in that moment. I listened, and for the first time, I saw Jake as more than just the man who let me down. I saw him as someone who was terrified of the unknown, just like I was. It didn't excuse what he did, but it helped me understand. We went to therapy together, and over time, I started to heal. Jake continued to grow, showing up every day not only for our son but for me as well. Slowly, I began to see that he was trying to rebuild my trust. Not with grand gestures, but with consistent love and effort. A few weeks ago, we had a quiet moment after our son fell asleep in Jake's arms. As I watched them, I realized something. Love isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up even after you've made mistakes. And Jake was showing up for me and our family in ways I never imagined he could. So no, I'm not leaving him. We've been through hell, but we've found our way back. And though the scars of that night will always be there, I've chosen to believe in the man who's here now, the man who's determined to be the best father and husband he can be. We're stronger now than we ever were before.